Well, we're in a series, and we're just about ready to wrap up a series on our core values. And core values, as many of you know, are those deep principles that a community or an individual discerns are really precious parts of what you hold to be the essential truth, and what you may gather or what you form an organization for. What you want to make sure is the intention, the outcome, the guidance that you are to follow, so that you are in line with who you've come here to be, what the organization is about. And it's important to revisit these things, obviously not just in a Sunday series, but for us to know on a regular basis that these values were discerned with a congregation coming together and really asking, what are we about? What's our deepest mission and purpose here? And of course, you know, we talk about the mission every Sunday, and that is about spiritual growth and development. And today's core value is probably the ultimate realization of our divine nature, which comes in the form of transformation. We don't use the word conversion here in Unity. We use the word transformation. And of course, there's a marked distinction between conversion and transformation, because conversion oftentimes has to do with some sort of an external thing that you take into your life or your experience, and that it makes you change your attitudes, you change your beliefs. But transformation is about reclaiming your original nature. What we believe the transformation is not that we actually become anything other than we really are, that has been occluded by a forgetfulness, a falling asleep to the reality of our own essential spiritual nature. And so the transformation is not an external change at all. It is an internal shift of how we know ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we identify ourselves. And we'll talk more about how that can actually happen. We'll take you through a little practice today, a little step-by-step awareness, kind of an awareness process to see if you can glimpse what we're talking about when we say your true nature. Many of you already have tasted that, but we're going to do this together as well. So let's talk about transformation and distinguish it from translation. Translation. Many religions, most of the religions in the world today, in fact, offer not transformative teachings, but translation teachings. And what translation teachings means is basically to help you have a perspective so that you can feel better about life. And this is not necessarily, this is not a pejorative, indictment of translation teachings, just to distinguish it from transformation. Translation would be, for example, if you were going through an experience in life and you are experiencing life as being against you. Anyone ever had that experience? And you feel that life is against you, you feel like a victim, you feel really in this personal hell. And it's very painful. When you are offered this notion of a higher power, of God, of this something that's this grand universe that is benevolent, that is on your side, what that does is it creates a context that regardless of what you're going through, you understand that there's some infinite intelligence, something that can see the whole big picture, that you can only see a piece of the puzzle, and it's only because you're seeing a piece of the puzzle that you really feel alone and that you really are suffering. And that maybe from the context of this grand view of things, which you don't have, but you understand there is one, there is an entity, there is an energy in which all things are seen, in which the interplay of energies, in which the matrix of this and that, and the comings and the goings, and the losses and the gains, and the ups and the downs, all is seen in a very, very perfected kind of understanding, that if you were given this as a notion, that just holding that in faith, even if you didn't have a personal experience of that reality, but just hearkening to that as a reality would give you a sense of comfort, yes? And there's nothing wrong with that, and it's absolutely necessary and helpful. And we've all perhaps had that kind of a relationship, perhaps still hold that relationship with God or with our higher self. That this notion that there is something that comforts me, even though I don't have it as an immediate reality, I hold it deeply because it makes sense to me. I'm intuiting that this is so. And out of intuiting that this is so, I take comfort. I rest in the arms of God, for example. You know, it says in Scripture, God loves you with an everlasting love. And we can take those sort of affirmations and we can rest in them. We can take refuge in those teachings and those truths. So let me take slide number 1, Penny. All transformation is inherently spiritual in nature, but not all teachings identified as spiritual are necessarily transformational. So you get that, though. All are spiritual, but not all spiritual teachings are transformational. There are many spiritual teachings that do not point to a new reality or a new identity. That's the difference. Their aim is for the individual to function better within the existing self-reality system. This may be called translational teachings. They seek to improve our life rather than to transform it. Rather than point to another dimension, they point to new possibilities within the known dimensions of life. Do you hear this? Now, we're familiar with this from just positive psychology, for example. This idea of many of us may have started with self-improvement type of programs where you seek to raise your image of yourself, yes? You know, you don't think highly of yourself. Most of us don't. For good reason. We got some negative messaging as we were growing up, and we have doubts about ourselves. We don't hold ourselves in high esteem. So this would be like, affirmations and things like that, where you begin saying, I am smart and I am, a beloved child of God. Or you would just begin to take on new ways of seeing yourself that would be more in line with a higher appraisal of who you are. And then also just techniques like even gratitude. Gratitude is another way of just feeling better about yourself, yes? And just instead of seeing what's missing in your life, you notice what's present. This enhances your experience of life. Forgiveness, another one, and I'm not talking about the purest kind of forgiveness, so don't call me on that because that'll come next Sunday. But when a forgiveness is more like when you just decide to let something go, and it doesn't have deep spiritual roots to it. It's just I'm just going to freaking let this go because I'm suffering here. That sort of forgiveness. So all of these things are valuable, and they're actually very important along the path because what they do is they make us more present to life. And whenever we're more present to life, then we are candidates for further inspiration. Do you understand what I'm saying? That you can't take someone who's just feeling like life is completely against them and then tell them that their self is not even real and it's all an illusion. See, that's a bridge too far. There's too much of a chasm of credibility, and this is not a strategic approach, translational teachings, but it is actually functionally more effective, and it's a great place to start. And compassion, that's another one. Compassion is a wonderful way of honoring people in their experience and allowing them to feel validated in their experience without necessarily agreeing with their appraisal of the experience. That's what compassion is. Compassion isn't like getting down in a hole with someone necessarily and being sympathetic. This is more empathy, understanding what you're experiencing, and I appreciate what you're going through. So I'm here to talk about transformation today, but I wanted to make it very clear what it was not and how there is a place for translational teachings, and there will always be translational teachings here, although we will not just leave you at that point. We will also offer transformational teachings. This is kind of where the evolution for many of us is that we're interested in taking this next step. because we have discussed, well, let me read slide 2, and that'll tell you what the next step is in a sense. Sorry, Penny. Penny gets up and does the video, then she has to come down and do the PowerPoint, and so she's wonderfully acrobatic. We appreciate that about her. So slide 2. But for some, when we were talking about translation, self-improvement and consolation is not enough. I mean, you may be in this court. More than comfort and consolation, they want complete freedom, unconditional peace of mind, and the experience of a deeper reality. Now you see if this lands for you. That is it something more deeper that's calling you than just comfort and consolation? Are you sort of looking for the answer that ends the quest, in a sense? For these individuals, our everyday reality is seen as a dream state, and they seek to awaken from the dream rather than simply to improve upon it. There's a little tongue-in-cheek there, but you understand. Now, this whole thing about, life is but a dream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream, is for many people, it's an inaccessible concept, and so a better way to look at it sometimes is, instead of saying all this life is just a dream anyway, and it's all made up, and it's just a fantasy, if that seems to be untenuous for your consciousness, another way to look at it is it possible that what I'm seeing and the interpretation that I am making about life is not ultimately true? Would anybody be able to sit with that? That you haven't seen the whole picture, right? If someone's going to say, "What do you see?" and you say, "Okay, well, I'm looking out here and I see about 80 people, and I see these chairs, and I see musicians," and you can agree on the appearances of things, but when you begin to make stories about things, we oftentimes really have very individual understandings and interpretations of life. And so, the appearances of life are not really what causes us to suffer. Have you noticed? It's the story that we make up about the appearances of life. If somebody, you're driving down the road, I use this example a lot because it happens on a frequent basis. You're driving down the road and someone does something in traffic where they cut in front of you or they pull out in front of you, and you feel this reaction. Well, the fact that they pulled out in front of you and you didn't hit them and you went merrily on your way, nothing happened than if they hadn't pulled out in front of you, right? But what the mind does with that is a whole nother, this is where the narrative goes to work. First of all, we may feel some fear, and then that fear may turn into anger very quickly, right? And then we have this whole story about how people in Santa Barbara don't know how to drive, or whatever. Or why do people have to be so... And suddenly, that is your new reality. What happened was a car pulled out, you were able to go through the intersection, and nothing happened. So when we begin to talk about this idea that life is a dream, we're not just talking about the documentable facts. We're talking about the story that we make up about it and how we relate to that story and what that says about us in the story. In other words, we're not see ourselves as a character in a movie. We see ourselves as real. We see this physical, personal self as being very, very real, and that everything that's happening to us is happening to us. And we do not have a context of a self beyond the body-mind. So many of us who have been doing this work for a while realize that it's important for us to begin to move beyond what we think we are, because we begin to understand that it is me seeing myself as this separate individual, this isolated individual that life happens to, and seeing it in that context, it causes all of my suffering. It's when the day goes away that because you realize that things keep happening out here. Circumstances keep happening out here. And they're going to always happen out there. And you begin to notice that some things really bother you and some things don't. And you begin to say to yourself, wait a minute, what's the one common denominator in all the experiences that have bothered me? Yeah. Circumstances change, but the bothered person remains the same. And when you begin to see this pattern in your life, you begin to say, well, if I have to find a way to justify everything that happens in my life, if I have to become some sort of a alchemist so that I can interpret everything in a positive way, I'm going to wear myself out. Do you understand this? You know, like I go, oh, well, he was just having a bad day, and oh, God is good all the time, and, you know, just this whole, we got to keep spinning stories of, you know, spinning cotton candy around every hurtful incident, you know, so we can wrap it in some sort of a happy thing, you know, instead of going, but wait a minute now, life is always going to do this. It's always going to do this. You're going to wear ourselves out trying to reinterpret it. So maybe the day comes when you say, I want to get to know the cause of this suffering. I really want to know this. I want to take responsibility. I want to be accountable for my experience. I want to be accountable for the fact that this, whoever this is here, is suffering, and I want to know why. And I want to know what it's made out of. And this oftentimes is the call to transformation. This is the call for the transformative teachings, where more so than building a happy-go-lucky outlook on life, it is to really explore the nature of the self. And so you're going to hear that coming from here, from this stage from time to time, because we're going to move, for those of you that want to, we're going to move more into identifying what the self is. And very much like the way that an artist who has a vision of a final form, we're going to work at it the way of cutting away what's not us. In other words, sort of exposing the false self, exposing that which we are not. This is the way the path to spiritual mastery is not just that instant awakening and then you suddenly know that you're the Christ or you're the Buddha or you're whatever. That happens to a very, very small number of people, which would be lovely if it all happened to us. But in the meantime, we need to work at the level of finding out, looking at what we're not. And as we expose what we're not, we're removing the obstacles to the awareness of what we are. Course in Miracles says, you know, love is what we are, but the practice is to remove the obstacles from the awareness of what we are. And so that's what I really want to be talking about these days, more than anything else, is to see if we don't have to take this by faith, we can begin, you know, to take away aspects of the self which formerly seemed to be who we were. And as we let those drop because we see they're not true, then we will be left with what? The divine original. Yes? The essential self. And that's, you know, the whole often told story of Michelangelo, who said, how did you paint, or how did you sculpt the Pieta? And he said, was it Pieta or David, the statue of David? And he said, well, I could see David in the marble, and I just took everything away that was not David. And when I was left taking away everything that was not David, then the only thing that remained was David. This is you, you know, God divine has a blueprint of you, an image and likeness of you as you truly are. And we have occluded the awareness. We have lost sight of that perfect holy child of God that we are, that perfection, not because anything happened, but because we took on stories about who we were, and we glommed them on to this pure self. And the only way that we're going to be able to regain that pure awareness is by pulling back, taking away what we're not. So I want to have a little practice with you this morning to give you an idea of how this might be experienced. So put everything down for a moment, and then we're going to do a little visualization process. And what this is about us recognizing that the thoughts and the feelings that we have and how we relate to those as an individual and how true that actually is or is not. So let's bring to mind something that disturbs you, something that has made you unhappy. And whatever pops up is good. You'll be able to apply this to any set of circumstances in life. But for now, just pick something, see what that is, something that bothers you. And notice the association that you have between how you feel. So feel your feelings. If you're unhappiness, let's say it's unhappiness. And notice how you have a link, an association between the unhappiness you feel and the situation that you connect to it, that you believe was the cause of your unhappiness. Now, as you do that, now let's bring to mind also, have you ever felt this unhappiness in your life before? And most of us would say, of course, yes. And so, can you notice that the same feeling of unhappiness that you're feeling when you think of this one situation also was present in you when the situation was entirely different? Can you pull that up? Noticing that unhappiness is something that you've experienced many times before. The circumstances have been different, but the unhappiness has been relatively constant. And so you begin to understand that perhaps maybe there is a bit of a doubt around whether this particular situation is the cause of this unhappiness that you're feeling. And now what we want to do is we want to look at the one who was unhappy. And so if I were to ask you, who is it that's unhappy? You'd probably say, I am. And if I were to ask you, what is I? You check in. Well, how do you associate yourself as an I? And most people would say, I, the body, or the mind. A body-mind, most typical associations for most people, a body-mind. And then you also have these sensations, and you have these feelings, and you have these thoughts, and you have these beliefs, and you have these opinions, and these memories, and all this whole cluster of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and so forth make up what you call yourself. Are you with me? Okay. If you're nodding off, it's one thing. If you're nodding, then I know you're with me. So let's just take the thoughts. Now, when you think a thought, have you noticed how when a thought comes, it takes a while, but eventually the thought goes, right? You've seen thoughts come and go. So when the thought goes, do you go with the thought? Or do you stay? You stay. The thought goes, you don't go with the thought. The thought passes, and then you're here. You're still here. We don't know what you are yet, but we know that whatever you are, you're here. Okay, so bring the feelings to mind. Let me be a little bit more energetic charge around feelings. So think of a feeling that you've had, maybe the feeling you have right now about unhappiness. Maybe it's something that you're familiar with. It comes. It spends whatever time it spends with you, and then it goes, right? Feelings don't last. They come, they go. But do you go with the feelings? No. You don't go with the feelings. So the thoughts come, they go. Feelings come, they go. So what else would we identify yourself as? So sensations. So if you were to rub your hand like this, and you would feel that sensation, and then stop. The sensation stops, but do you stop? No. What about perceptions? What we use our senses for? What we see and what we hear, what we taste and touch. These are our perceptions. But don't we know that we perceive things, we see something, and if that's something, if we close our eyes, for example, the image goes away, the perception goes away, but do we go away? Do we go away? No. So we begin to see that what we associate ourselves to be, the I am that we think that we are, feelings, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, all of these things come and all of these things go, and yet there is someone here. We don't know what this is yet, but we know that whatever this is that we still identify as I is still here. So this is what is called in spiritual terms pure awareness. And so when we see ourselves as pure awareness and we recognize, we bring back to mind this situation that apparently caused us to be unhappy. We realize that where did that unhappiness, who was the one that experienced that unhappiness? Well, it was the one that had the thoughts and the feelings and the perceptions, perhaps. But we just recognize that that one is ephemeral, is temporary. It comes and it goes. Yet there's something here still that we consider ourselves, our I. So is your I that remains, is that the one that was upset, unhappy? Or was this awareness some part of yourself that had not been affected but was able to clearly observe some aspect of being that experienced unhappiness? Sit in this for a while. What of you is able to notice all these thoughts, all these feelings that you have that are transient, that stay and go, and yet this knowing, this awareness, this screen of recognition remains? This is what Jesus said when he said, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge by righteous judgment. There will be trials and tribulations, but I have overcome the world." Jesus, when he said he was overcoming the world, he wasn't talking about, he never traveled outside of his small towns. This was not any overpowering of anything. It was overcoming a sense of being that was rooted in the physical, in the phenomenal, in the temporary. That he overcame that sense of his identity. The ego, also known as the ego, the separated sense of self. And when one overcomes the ego, one is left only with this pure awareness. And in this state of awareness, we are in a league with all things divine. There are no longer any obstacles to peace. There are no conditions needed for an experience of love. We become the embodiment of love that we already are, and we realize it. We experience grace upon grace. Because no longer does life have to conform to a very highly sensitized image of self. Life can do what life does. And we can sit here in this deep place of knowing, of being, of awareness, and watch the show, take part as we wish, not be diminished by anything, nor inflated, but to stay in this place of wholeness, of this eternal nature. And this is the journey without distance. Course in Miracles says this: the little I, which we would call the ego, seeks to enhance itself by external approval, external possessions, and external love. But the self that God created needs nothing. It is forever complete, safe, loved, and loving. It seeks to share rather than to get, to extend rather than project. It has no needs and wants to join with others out of their mutual awareness of abundance. And so this is our journey. This is the realization that transformation is all about. This recognition that we are already at home in God, dreaming that we are separate. And we thank you, Spirit, that you are doing your perfect work in us according to our readiness and our willingness to translate or transform into a greater appreciation of the divine self that we are, that we might realize our divine nature more powerfully this week as we begin to peel back and peel away and jettison that which is no longer true about us, that we have recognized is no longer true about us. Not on faith do we do this work, but in recognition of a truer reality that is made plain through this inquiry. This is our prayer. This is our hope. This is our liberation. This is what we are deeply grateful for. Thank you, God. Amen. And I also want to share with you a testimonial this morning. It has to do with someone who considers transformation as part of their experience here. So this individual says, for me, Unity is a safe, supportive place to explore my spiritual path within an active, heart-centered community that encourages growth and transformation. At the Sunday morning services, I feel nourished at the core of my being. I feel honored and blessed to be a part of Santa Barbara Unity and hope to be an active member for many years to come. So what we know is that this transformation does happen. Shift happens. It's happening here. It's happening in the hearts and minds of people. We're grateful for that. If this is a static experience, then either we're not providing transformative teachings, or there's perhaps not a willingness to shift and move. And I would hope that both things are active here all the time.